5 cybersecurity tactics to protect the cloud. This is an article about mid last year by Roland Costilla, and he works for SAP. And so I thought this was actually a very good article and a good topic to talk about, because companies a lot of times have the notion that I use the cloud, like Amazon, AWS, or Azure, so my security's good. And that's not the way that works. So just actually using the cloud and not regarding security can be worse, because now you're in the public domain, and if you're not locking things down the way you're supposed to, then that's a problem. I did a separate video where they discovered that I think it was 70% of ServiceNow instances were leaking data, and it was because of configuration. It wasn't ServiceNow. It was because of how the customers are managing their instances. So this is cloud security, 5 cybersecurity tactics to protect the cloud. So let's look and see what this guy has to say. Okay, so he had a couple of good quotes. I think here's a great quote. There is always a shared responsibility between companies and their cloud infrastructure providers for managing the cloud. This applies to private, public, and hybrid models. There is a always shared responsibility, always. And I would even go one step further and to say you are responsible for your business. End of discussion. So pick good suppliers that are managing and running their cybersecurity programs well. Do good due diligence on them. Make good decisions. Don't just go for the cheapest Joe, because that's where you get into trouble, right? Supply chain, that's a huge source of breach. And then understand you're responsible. And as long as we keep the mindset that I'm responsible, then I'm going to do the due diligence steps I need, at least to the best of my ability and good faith, of what I need to avoid any sort of issue happening. Okay, so number 1, focus on end-to-end security monitoring. So I love this. First of all, we monitor. It's great that you have a cloud, whatever, but you got to monitor. What are you monitoring it for? You're monitoring it for anomalies. You're monitoring it for some sort of intrusion, like, hey, something's not right. You're monitoring it for, behavior that's different. There's all sorts of tools and platforms and ways to do that. The point is you have to monitor it. That has to be turned on. I talk to companies who don't turn it on, and you need to turn it on. Or then more prevalent, I talk to companies who turn it on, but they don't actually monitor it. And so there you go, end-to-end monitoring. And so it's very important that you have these monitoring practices in place. A lot of it, the technology can help you to do a lot of the work, and then you can also configure it to alert what needs to be alerted, and then that's when the human gets engaged. You can also configure a lot of these tools that they'll shut things down. They'll do that kind of auto containment for any sort of detection of things that, like I gave an example in a different video, that ransomware. Once a lot of these tools see that the third file gets encrypted, or however many, bam, it stops it, because that's the signature of ransomware. So don't let it go any further. Lock it down. But you got to have that in place. So even through these tools, the monitoring, a lot of that can be automated, and then it can shut it down and contain that so that it's at least there. Or if this computer has a problem, it can contain it so that it doesn't go past this device and back onto the network. So there is those good capabilities, but ultimately you have to design, what does your program look like, and what are you going to monitor for, and how are you going to do that, and how are you going to keep it, configure it well to begin with, keep it configured well. Then when a person needs to get involved, what does that look like? What is the process? What is the notification? What is the approvals? What is the root cause analysis? What does all that look like? You got to define all that. And so that's very much a part of this around your cloud specifically. Number 2, pursue a risk-based approach to vulnerability management. So vulnerability management is huge, because vulnerabilities are basically like leaving your doors and windows open and being shocked when somebody comes and breaks in and steals stuff. Don't leave your doors and windows open. Keep them closed. Have an alert that texts you if the door's not locked. I have that in our home. Have an alert if the window's open. A lot of the alarm systems do that. There's a reason for that, because just because you have the locks there, if they're not engaged, doesn't really do the job. And so that's the same principle with vulnerabilities. And so there's lots of vulnerabilities in the environment, like lots of them, and there's constantly new ones coming out every day. And so the point of this is evaluate and prioritize threats based on how easily they can be exploited and weaponized against the company. So that is that risk-based approach. There can be 1,000 vulnerabilities, but how are you going to go through and review those to prioritize when they should get done, how they should get done, how important are they, or what would be the effect if this were exploited in our environment? And every environment's different, right? And yes, there's standard scoring out there that can help you kind of prioritize that, and you should leverage that, but you shouldn't blindly only use that. Likewise, most companies don't have the resources to apply all of the fixes to vulnerabilities and mitigate them all. That's unrealistic. So you got to figure out which ones and what the time frame is. And a lot of companies kind of do a patching cadence, and that's fine. But what falls out of that cadence? If you're doing monthly patching or weekly patching, well, what if something happens, 24 hours after the day that you did all your patching? Well, how are you going to pick that up? How are you going to monitor for that? Make decisions around that, prioritize that. And it might be something specific to your environment. The kind of default scores, the CVSS scores, you can go up or down with those. And so the idea is that's a baseline. Then you do your analysis, like, would this be true for us? Maybe, maybe not. Some companies just this level and above, they just apply it. That's fine. But the point is you evaluate that. But what does that evaluation look like? And then what is that prioritization and that tracking so you don't lose sight of them, because it's massive, right? There's lots of vulnerabilities. And so you got to know about them. You got to track them, you got to prioritize them, and ultimately get them all the way through. And you want to do all of that with, well, not the first one, you want to identify them, but you want to do all of that with a risk-based approach. And so that becomes part of your risk management and your program. Number 3, develop concept for privileged identity and access management, and including the following elements: identify separation of duties, roles and authorizations, dedicated monitoring for privileged accounts, especially for customer environments. So basically, privileged access is going to be your admin people, right? They might have administrative rights to the database. They might have administrative rights to a customer-facing application, or administrative rights to the network. So those are my privileged access users. And those users are automatically higher risk because they have access to things, so they can more easily be nefarious. And actually, if they hit a phishing link and they're an admin, guess what? That can do more damage just because of the level of access they have. So the idea is you want to monitor those people, not because we're going to assume they're going to do bad things, but because we're going to monitor our environment. And even if something happens through their accounts that is anomalous to their normal behavior, then we can shut that down. We can identify that. And then, like in the case of audit or risk management, we have those logs of monitoring those activity to go back to, which is always very helpful. So if you can, that is a really good practice to do.